Hello there. Time for the second video today. Now, this would technically be my first video if it weren't for the fact that I forgot to do one yesterday. So today we'll do it on society. For that one. Anyways, society is important because of its relevance to the individual. For as one individual is, well, themselves, and thus they are, society is made up of many individuals who each interact and cooperate, or fight depending on the situation. Cooperation, competition. Society is what unites them as people rather than just being themselves as individuals. So that begs the question, does society matter? Now, for a collectivist, the answer is yes. But for an individualist like me, does society still matter? Yeah, of course. See, society is built in part on agreement. You have the natural agreement between the individual and society, as well as agreement between society and nature. Now, one might ask, what do we agree with nature on? Simple. Natural law. Your natural rights. It is a contract we all enter into at birth where, in exchange for our lives and our right to it, we also give to society a promise that we will protect their rights as well. Nature, of course, oversees this, as it is from nature we derive these rights. Now, some will argue that it's the divine that we derive our rights from. Others will say we don't have any natural rights. It's just to be given as is, and it's to be done by the state. I disagree with the second for a very simple reason. A right is something that we all have inherently. The only thing we have inherently is that which we can do on our own. Now, nature may seem like a weird way to boil this down, but those things we can do by ourselves if we were completely cut off from civilization, such as picking up things that aren't owned by anyone and then taking it for ourselves, eating food, basic normal things that we're allowed to do, even swearing out at you in a different language like, say, Latin, is a form of expression that we can only have because nature itself does not restrict these things. The natural world does not give a single iota what you say. You could curse like a sailor on the ports. The thing is that the nature's not going to do jack. You could draw things that are considered 18 plus. Nature ain't going to stop that. It is only when we enter society that we could theoretically lose these rights, and the only reason we can is because people can use force upon us. And so how do we avoid that? Well, simple. We all agree and negotiate, effectively, that we will not violate those rights in exchange for others not violating ours. That is a basic principle of natural law. You have your natural rights, I have mine. As long as we don't cross them, we're good. With that said, we also have agreements with society. These are usually extra rules, societal preconceptions that people believe in and are done to ensure a better life. For example, marriage. How marriage works is highly dependent on your society. But regardless, the exact rules and customs are dependent on society. You can't just say, right, I'm married to a rock now. Well, you can, but no one else is going to recognize that as a legitimate marriage, much less the government. Do you think the U.S. government's going to say, okay, they get the marriage tax cut because they're married to a rock? No, they're going to say, that's completely ridiculous, you are not married, you're still single, we'll still count you as single for the purpose of taxation. And so these three all have agreements with each other. The individual and society have an agreement based on collective taboos and accepted actions. Naturally, both society and the individual have agreements with nature itself on what is naturally right. Basically, that which is allowed. That's natural law. And then, of course, there's negotiation between two other entities, society and the state. Now, how this exactly works depends on the state and government. But let's just say, for instance, that you're the United States. Forgive my poor drawing of the United States Capitol building, but if it works, it works. Let's say this is the capital of your government. they don't negotiate with individuals. Not poor ones, anyways. Rich ones, maybe. Like, they may negotiate with Musk or Bezos, but they're not going to pay someone like you or me any mind. But with society, the collective that they rule over, then they negotiate, usually agreeing on certain laws that are based on both this and this. So, for example, our Constitution is heavily influenced by natural law theory, and it's built on that. It's why the First Amendment is not, you can't say whatever you want. It has these parameters that says, all right, the government cannot restrict these things, including speech, assembly, petition, religion, that sort of thing. It's based on the idea of natural law, which is, you can do this on your own because you're an individual, but we can't interfere unless absolutely necessary. It's the same with a lot of other of the amendments. For example, to quote the Second Amendment, a well-regulated militia being necessary for the purpose of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. It says nothing that the state's giving you the right to own guns. It rather says, the state's allowing you to do it, it won't touch it, so you do you. And it's specifically people who they give that right, not the militia. The militia is the justification. You actually see this with a few other amendments. They usually add a bit of justification or an explanation on when it was accepted. Common thing to do. And these are the three main agreements. Now, the state, too, has its negotiation with nature. The state, in its existence, agrees to hold up natural law. This is because the state relies on force. It is a monopoly on force. Remember, the police are the only group outside the military who are allowed to use force without question. One may say, well, certain states regulate what the police are allowed to do, and while that's true, when it comes down to it, this police and the government are going to look at it on, okay, we used force, why shouldn't we? When normally with a person it's, why should you have been allowed to? With Castle Doctrine, that's the exact principle. Why should you be allowed to do this? Was it on your home? Okay, it was. You've met the qualifications. This force was authorized, essentially. However, with the state, the authorization is assumed, built in. As such, it's considered to have a monopoly on force. And in exchange for being allowed to have this monopoly on force, nature effectively says, okay, you can do that, but you must protect people's natural rights. Because, for the state, it is more efficient for it to protect people's natural rights, generally speaking, than for it to be left purely to the people. So that's where law enforcement comes in. Forgive the horrible badge. And that's where the courts come in. The point of the courts and the law enforcement is to maintain order, but also to enforce natural rights. For example, if a thief steals from you, does the court say, okay, we've looked over this and the state gets to keep it? No, it says, alright, they stole from you, you give back the property, thief, and in exchange you also pay the state a fine to disincentivize continual violations of natural rights. The police, meanwhile, if someone's, say, trying to break into a house, are duty-bound to get that person out of the house because they don't belong there. That is not their territory. They are trespassing on another person's individual property. And so what you have to do as the individual is figure out, okay, I'm in this society, I am under this government, and I have natural laws that I must abide by. What then should I do? The answer is simple. Work with society. Not completely. You are still your own person, but finding your niche, finding your specialty, and ensuring that you do it the best you can is helpful to everyone else. Because think about it. If you kept doing everything on your own, it would take years to do anything actually productive. Even trained survivalists have difficulty doing things as complicated as we do on our daily lives thanks to the assistance of other people. For example, imagine running a business, being the accountant, the manager, and the person taking orders and filling things out by yourself as a single person. That is nigh on impossible at a certain point. Sure, small businesses can manage similar feats, but even then it's difficult for them. And so it's better as a person to find your role within society. Maybe you want to take on a lot of the burden yourself. You are still responsible for yourself, but maybe you want to take a bit more than most other people. That's fine. But you still gotta work with society because those people are producing a lot of the things you need. I know the cog in the machine may seem like a very weird way to put it, but you really are. You're just another part of society. And it's better to find your place in it than try to fight it. And so find your place, make friends, and try to live a good life. You are but one. Society is an immeasurable amount of more people. How exactly more, we don't know, because it depends on what you define as society. For example, one might say the entire United States population is society, in which case that's well over 300 million you're talking about there. Maybe it's Canada's 30 million. Or maybe it's your small town, which could be a few hundred to a few thousand. Could be New York City with well over a few million, I think. Probably just more than a million at least. And so on and so forth. How you define society gets vague. You could even count it as the whole human population, in which case you're working with well over 7 billion. But regardless, it's good to find a niche, a place to belong and work. I just call this collective individualism, but that's not really a good description because you're still an individual. You're just considering yourself within the realm of other people and saying, okay, well, I can do this, so I'm going to provide this in exchange for usually pay, but also just for people to like you on occasion. And they're going to help me. Work with society, society helps you. Now, you could work with specific individuals, that's fine. And you could work with society as a whole, that's also fine. But what's important is finding your place. How you do this does matter a bit, because, for example, you can't just try everything. That's inefficient. But it's better than nothing, and I generally advise instead, look for what you're good at and what you like. If you can find an overlap, that's where you want to try to fit in. Maybe it's not a very popular career, but hey, that can lead to opportunities. Or maybe if you see there's something that's low skill, but you're willing to fill it and others aren't, like, say, being a garbage man, well then, you could do that if you want to help people. There are many options to help society. Many options that are very profitable, both in terms of emotional benefits and monetary. Frankly, you have a lot of options. But what's important is you remember, society is individuals. But also, individuals are part of society. It's not just... How do I phrase this? It's not like society is just some nebulous thing. It is individuals, totaled and calculated up. It is X times population. You are 1X, and you can be part of PX, but you are not exclusively to that. You are still yourself, you are still your own thing. You can contribute and be a part of it, but you still exist on your own. It is the many individual X's that make up this equation. This combination of a variable, well, and it's also supposed to be a variable, but it's functioning like a constant here, so I'll take it. That's the reality. Society is not some just amorphous collective. It is individuals. And your benefit comes not from declaring that you wish to support the collective, but rather saying, I as an individual wish to look out for the best interests of myself and other individuals through my own actions. Because it's very easy to miss all the individuals in here. Because remember, this is X repeated. X multiplied by X multiplied by X multiplied by X multiplied by X. There are many X's in here. But in the end, we still just label it PX to make it simple. we still just say it's the United States, it's Canada, rather than thinking of it as 30 million or 300 million people all living within a specific jurisdiction. They're still individuals. That hasn't changed. And it's better to look at it as I wish to help them and contribute to them for my own interest and theirs. Because remember, you do get benefits from helping others. It's often portrayed like the guy who gets out easy is the one who does the most underhanded, backstabby things. That's not the case. Especially in as complicated a society as we have in the modern day, the most productive thing to do is work with others, because they provide skills that you cannot on your own. And it's worth backing them up when they ask for their end of the bargain, because you need more help than just for this one instance. You need help constantly throughout your life. When people say self-made man, what they really mean is that someone has found their way to contribute to society without taking more from it than they provide. You can never be truly self-made in society because, well, it's society. You're cooperating with others. Even the most rich businessman or the most depraved person got this way through their own actions by interacting with others. They cannot become what they are without interactions. You cannot become wealthy by ignoring others. You cannot become an isolated person without actively rejecting integration. It is your choice. Personal responsibility is a requirement for society, not because it helps people stay in society. It does do that. But because it's what's required to keep this stable. If any of these decides to break off from this formula and form p minus 1x, then, well, what ends up happening? Not much. But if, for example, that person decides to say, yeah, I totally don't have any problems with that, it taints the whole thing. If, for example, you allow someone to engage in degenerate behavior, I'm leaving it open for now, but I do have a specific definition for what I consider such, and you don't kick them out, or you don't hold them personally responsible for what they do, it corrupts everything else, because you are not backing away from that while still tolerating behavior. The behavior is still there. It's still present, and the person's still there to continue it. But you aren't distancing yourself either, so everyone else is looking at it like, okay, this person supports this thing? And it's not the wrong conclusion to come from because you're effectively covering for it. The problem with collectivism is it often discourages this, putting the interest in the collective sense rather than the individual sense. Remember, in order for society to work, every individual must make this agreement, must say, I want to contribute to this so that I gain my benefits. If instead they say, well, I'm a part of this, that doesn't really help them because they're not thinking, oh, this helps me and this helps them, so let me do this so I can get that. They're instead thinking, well, I'm gaining all the benefits of the society. Does that help anyone? Really? No. What instead happens is often personal responsibility is shirked when one is in a collective group. This is especially seen when you have multiple executives. As one would point out when looking at, say, Arabs and their tendency in warfare, they have a lot of people involved in military decision-making. And often, those people just stop pointing the blame at each other the moment the question of who did the bad thing comes up. It's why the Arabs were so thoroughly beaten by Israel in the 7 days. The Egyptian army moved quicker than they reasonably expected back because of how badly the Israelis were beating them, and yet when the Egyptian government was wondering what the heck is going on, why are we losing to this one army, all the officers would shift the blame. And then in order to help things, they would lie about how well the war was going to get other Arab powers involved. And what happened? Oh yeah, they got their butts kicked too, and now there's a big issue with the Golan Heights and the West Bank because Israel kicked them so thoroughly out of those areas that Israel was occupying all the way up to Gaza. Actually, even beyond Gaza, they were going all the way to the Sinai. The fact is, when you have a shirking of personal responsibility, this whole gamble fails and this whole agreement does not work. Why? Because when someone treats it as if they are just a part of society, no ifs, ands, or buts, they tend to feel entitled to the benefits of society. That's not how things work. Society is built on mutual cooperation, not being a parasite sipping what tea is produced while ignoring the people grabbing the leaves and brewing the I'm stuttering, sorry, and brewing the tea. You do not get to ignore the part where someone's harvesting the leaves, brewing the tea, and then serving it to you, while still saying, oh yeah, I'm totally part of this, while sipping on your beverage. That's not how things work. In order for society to truly function, people must acknowledge their individual role in it, and then contribute to it, agreeing that they gain more by staying with others and helping them be better than by letting everything fall to its own. Now, do I believe an individual should be allowed to go off, say, homestead some random area and just ignore the rest of society? Yeah, totally. Does that mean I believe that's the best option? No. But if someone wants to homestead, they should be allowed to. Again, it's about personal responsibility and the individual choosing. Because when an individual is forced to, they tend to not agree to a lot of things. There are plenty of things people have done willingly that they would have struggled to agree with if they had been forced to. And that's a big deal. You want people to knowingly agree. Society is built on agreement. It is built on bonds. Specifically, your bonds with those individuals that connect you to it, that tether you to it. Personal responsibility comes with that because how are you going to maintain those bonds? How are you going to maintain your connection with society? By holding up your end of the bargain. Society is important not because it is that big collective of all the people, but because it helps every individual so long as they contribute. Because people are better when they pool their knowledge and find out what they're good at and devote themselves to it than when they're constantly divided or constantly shifting the blame. Society is important. It must be defended to the best of our abilities. And we must protect it from anything that would danger it. But that is still our call to make. So, hope you enjoyed, and have a good one.